for migrant and refugee children, as well as highlighting the role of psychosocial support in the context of their inclusion in the European societies. It's a series of 3 webinars through which we aspire to bring professionals working in the field and educators to bring them together, engage them in a dialogue, share experience, know-how, identify needs and challenges, and hopefully produce some interesting recommendations towards the objective of peaceful coexistence in Europe. We would like to thank Network for Dialogue and CAICID International Dialogue Center for co-funding and supporting this objective. Network for Dialogue is a European-wide platform established to bring faith and civil society actors together to develop dialogue and produce some inclusion policies for migrants and refugees in Europe. That's all from me. I give happily the microphone to our dear Suchi to give you a bit of okay, also I forgot to say that about there is a platform where you can always refer to, ask questions, find some useful material regarding our job. And we hope that the input of the webinar series is going to be presented in a booklet with the key reflection strategies, tools, and policy recommendations. I'll be happy to give the microphone to Adia Suchis now. I hope you enjoy and have a nice meeting. And he is going to tell us a few things about the technicalities of the webinar and introduce us to our moderator for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Despina. I just wanted to go highlight some of the technical things. I think everybody is now used to Zoom and its technical use, but just to highlight, it's important that everybody keep the mics muted when you are not speaking. During the plenary, when the presenters are sharing as the panel, please do keep the mics muted, and when later you are invited to ask questions, and even as they present, you can ask questions using the chat option that's available. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see this bubble that indicates where you can click, and then the chat will open for you. You can post all your comments and questions to the presentations, and then there'll be those questions will be directed to the moderators who can then direct them to the speakers to respond. So please do use actively the chat function and actively engage. Feel free to keep your videos on, but if you wish to save on data or for some reason keep your turned off, that's okay. But when you are in later in the second half of the webinar, when you are in smaller groups, do try to turn your video on so that in a smaller group you are able to interact with one another and talk, and people can see you as well. Technical wise, I think that those are the main things. If you have a problem at any point, you can message me, or sometimes if Zoom gives a problem, it helps to log out and log in. And if the audio is not working or something, that sometimes helps to sort that problem. But otherwise, the invitation for you to actively participate. There is a panel of experts who we invited to share, but at the same time, it's your sharing that matters. It's your experiences, it's your situations that we want to discuss. So your active participation is, I think, what is most important throughout the webinar. Thank you very much. So can I then, Despina, hand it over to Anastasia Rapti?
Yes. Athanasia Rapti is going to be our moderator for today. She's a social worker, and she's working as a scientific supervisor in a shelter for unaccompanied minors that we run as Syniparxis in Greece. And she's going to give us a highlight of what will be discussed today and introduce us to our speakers. So Athanasia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Despina. Thank you, Suchi. Good evening to all participants and presenters. It's a great pleasure to be moderator of this second webinar. Today's webinar title is Psychosocial Support for Resilience and Well-Being of Children in the Context of Migrant and Refugee Inclusion in Europe. The main objectives under discussion is to initiate a dialogue on the role and significance of psychosocial support for migrant and refugee children, focusing on unaccompanied minors, psychosocial support as a fundamental procedure of their transition to adulthood, and of course, their smooth inclusion in host societies. Namely, we hope that this webinar will succeed in providing the necessary space for the participants to firstly engage into discussion about the current context, including challenges and also opportunities and good practices in regards with the situation of migrant and refugee children. After that, we call all to reflect on the complex role of psychosocial support for children concerning empowerment and building resilience. Finally, we look forward for recommended practices and tools that can be used both as regards the support of refugee children, as well as working with host societies so as to promote inclusiveness. Today's webinar will last for 2.5 hours, and its structure will be as follows. 4 speakers will present brief inputs that will serve as introduction in enabling a constructive dialogue. The 4 presentations will be followed by a plenary dialogue with questions and answers that will last for 30 minutes. Please feel free to pose questions and make comments. Breakout groups will follow, in which main issues will be discussed, and we hope to end in recommendations. After the breakout rooms, plenary dialogue follows again, so comments, thoughts, ideas can be shared, since participants and presenters come from different countries, working environments, and backgrounds. We hope that this webinar will be completed having provided valuable conclusions for the future. Without further delay, I move on with great pleasure and honor to introduce the 4 panelists of today's webinar. I would also like to say that panelists will set forth their presentations by answering some guiding questions. Each presenter will have 6 minutes for the presentations. So, it's a great pleasure to invite the first panelist, Ms. Athanasia Kotsiatou, social worker and director of social and legal services in Syneparxis Ecumenical Refugee Program. Ms. Athanasia Kotsiatou will speak about the general overview of the role and aspects of psychosocial support. So,
thank you. Thank you, Athanasia. Thank you. Good afternoon to all of you. Please be kind with me because as I am the first speaker, so I have a big anxiety. English is not my mother language, and I am in quarantine for the 7th day, so for COVID, so be kind with me. Let's start with my slides, my first slide now. My presentation has to do with psychosocial support for resilience and well-being of children in the context of migrant and refugee inclusion in Europe. The second, please. The next. Okay. Before I refer to psychosocial support, let's see together some terms very briefly, because I don't have so much time, that will be very useful for people that are not involved in this sector. What is psychosocial means in the relation between psychosocial and social factor affecting in the well-being of an individual. A psychosocial approach tends to respond to people and interconnected social, psychological needs, addressing them in an integrated manner. Next, please. In this slide, you will see what is psychosocial support. According to International Red Cross, it is an internationally agreed approach to victims of disaster, catastrophe, or violence to foster resilience and positive outcomes. Psychosocial care aims to easing reception of normal life by preventing long-term consequences of potentially traumatic situations. I don't want to give more details about this, just few terms. Next, please. It's very important to mention that psychosocial support is related closely with human rights and based on them. All member states of European Union providing the following common rights. Act facilitates access to employment, education, procedure for recognition of qualification, social welfare, healthcare, and accommodation. Next, please. And the last term has to do with unaccompanied minors. Accompanied minors are children who have been separated from both parents and other relatives, are not being cared by any adult who by law or custom is responsible for doing so. Also, we work with them in our organization, and we have seen that it's an extremely vulnerable population. Next slide. Let's see together now what is psychosocial support in practice and what is a case management. In general, it is an individual plan which the psychosocial supporters have to conduct when a minor or a beneficiary arrives to our shelter. The first step has to do with introduction and engagement between the minor in our organization and the minor and our organization or the psychosocial supporter. The second step has to do with to assess minor situation and needs. It's very important. This is a long procedure because includes observation, sessions, and in order his background, his or her background or her needs. The third step has to do with individual action plan. The psychosocial supporters have to make a case action plan which includes short-term goals and long-term goals in order to address the minor needs and support him as well as they can. As you can understand, this case action plan is always revised and is specific and is individualized. The fourth step is to connect the minor with resources, provide direct interventions. This is the implementation of action plan. Of course, every time the psychosocial supporters, they have to revise this action plan and the implementation of the action plan. The fifth step has to do with the follow-up. In this step, the psychosocial supporters have to answer to the questions: have the goals been achieved? Does the minor need more assistance? And of course, if not, the case plan has to be revised. It's obvious from this plan, from this short plan, that the case management is a flexible procedure, and adopts feedbacks and revise them again and again every time. And the last step is the case, if you close the case, has to do with, with family reunification. If the minor becomes an adult or drops out, a minor leaves the center. Next, please. Thank you. About psychosocial support, it's very important if you work as a psychosocial supporter to focus for us on these actions. First of all, knowledge about the cultural, political, economic context of minors' country of origin. It's very important to be aware, all the psychosocial supporters to be aware about the political situation, about the political context in the country of origin, about the population, tribes, war, civil wars, conflicts. Also about the religious context, what happened in his country of origin. Customs, national celebrations, and values, such as marriages in early age, minors' labor, situation that might seem barbaric to us, but it's common for them. Financial issues, the economic status, also, it's very important. Standards of living, cost of living in the country of origin. Also welfare or health system, because sometimes and very often their perception for health and welfare is quite different than ours. And of course, educational system, it's very important. Next, please. I think that I'm on time, but I'm trying. A second action that we believe that is very important to focus on is the transition to European reality. The psychosocial supporters have to provide early intervention by covering basic needs: food, accommodation, health, and legal documents. It's one step. The second step has to do with the community work in order to welcome and integrate minors in the host countries. I won't mention many things about this, but it's very important to prepare and support the legal communities in order to accept the newcomers and not see them as threats. But I think that another co-speaker will refer to this, so I will go to my next slide. Integration or inclusion? This is a question, a big question for psychosocial supporters. Also, I don't know, there is a big conflict about this question. And the psychosocial supporters have to decide which method or which part of this are going to follow. The main issue for me in this question is the participation in available inclusive or integrated programs which are implemented by government or by NGOs. And of course, an essential step for this question is an access to public schools. Next, please. Next slide, thank you. If you want to talk for inclusion or not integration, the big challenge is to have the contact with the country of origin of minor. It's very important. To celebrate with them, celebration like Ramadan, Christmas, Nowruz. Also, it's very important to, as a psychosocial supporter, to give them the chance to have frequent contact with members of family, even in Europe or even in country of origin. It's very, very important. And of course, to keep in touch with their mother language and their culture, not forget their mother language and their culture. Summarizing my presentation and working as a social worker and psychosocial supporter, as I told you, for many years, almost 17 years, I strongly believe that psychosocial support is one of the main paths for resilience and well-being of migrant and refugee children. It's not easy to measure the benefits right now, but by numbers, but it will provide to us, to the next generation, the strength to pursue and live in Europe in peace. Also, it's the only way to safeguard the social cohesion in Europe. Finishing my presentation, we want to share with you a small film about Haidar's story. We know very well that images brings messages easier than words to the audience. Therefore, we want to share with you this small video and think for 26 seconds why psychosocial support is needed through this video. It's needed for this minor. Thank you. The video, please. I don't know why the video doesn't play. I can give some small information to gap. Oh, okay.
It's the wrong one. That's the wrong one. It's the small one.
Was also music, but I don't know why. Let's give you some small info about this video. This is Haidar is a minor refugee that his social worker asked him to draw something about his life for a BIA tool in order to convince the member state of Europe to reunite it with his family. And we wanted to share it with you because we think that images are better than my words or other words. Thank you for your attention. And I'm open to your questions.
Thank you, Athanasia. So I have to say that the key issues is that the psychosocial support is a scientific method that follows specific steps. And these steps and this method is founded on fundamental human rights. But and also that the answer about integration or inclusion is that the answer is inclusion and needs very good knowledge of different culture so as to include the cultural characteristics into the new environment, the new European environment. So the next panelist is Ms. Nilam Fida, who is a global child protection advisor in Islamic Relief. And she will refer to basic principles of child protection. So, Ms. Nilam Fida.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I'm currently struggling with a sore throat, but I hope that you'll be all able to make sense of my presentation. So I'm just going to go ahead and share that and start my presentation. Thank you to my colleague who did a great job setting the scene. And what I will be speaking to is the child protection considerations that speak to psychosocial support, but bringing in a sort of a stronger lens on faith engagement. Right. According to InfoMigrant, more than 18,000 migrant and refugee children were missing in Europe during 2019. According to UNICEF, during the period of January to June in 2020, some 6,200 children arrived in Europe, of which 37% were separated or unaccompanied. It's important to remember that many of these children and young people feel they have no choice, no future, no safety in a home that they were brought up in. They have no legal structure and therefore have no alternative but to take matters into their own hands and embrace the risk of being exposed to violence, abuse, and exploitation at the hands of people smugglers or traffickers to embrace a better future. Most of these children will experience horrific scenes during this transition. These children will inevitably have long-lasting impacts, some of which may be illustrated through social change, forming social relationships, impact on their behavior, physical reactions, emotion, disengagement, and ultimately affecting their spirituality. These changes may be exhibited through struggling to sleep, nightmares, struggling to form relationships, immense guilt for leaving their families behind in some situations, self-harm, and in very, very extreme situations, suicide. These are further compounded by service providers in the host communities not being able to cope with the immense demand or having the necessary expertise and resources to assist with the specific needs of the migrant and refugee children, which creates a huge impact on the well-being of the children. The list provided here is not an exhaustive list. And these concerns are not just exposed to children at the hands of people smugglers and traffickers, but also those within the host community as well. What basic support can host communities provide? We currently know the gaps that exist, but how are they being addressed and how are those measures being adjusted? So a review of existing approaches to address the needs of children is critical. More effective coordination of referral pathways, which include local communities, is needed. There's extensive research done which demonstrates that local actors are often on the front line in humanitarian efforts for refugee children and migrants. These efforts may vary from immediate assistance to long-term measures. In addition to the multiple layered approach, care of the child and young person or young people's spiritual care is vital. There is a critical gap in the response to provide spiritual care among survivors of war and violence, considering the intense harm and trauma that these children may have faced and experienced. Therefore, it is essential that faith actors play the role of psychosocial first aiders, which in some cases they are already doing, but don't necessarily have the technical know-how in providing that very important initial support to help them cope, build their resilience. It's also these faith communities that could play an essential role in providing inclusive and accessible education. And this is building on the point that my colleague made about having that inclusive approach, which is really, really critical. It's within these same safe spaces that we could also provide these children with recreational activities and some level of normality, which is missing from their lives. Sorry, one more slide. Finally, promoting well-being of migrant and refugee children. So here again, this is not an exhaustive list, but we can use the faith community and local actors to promote messages of health, well-being. We can establish referral mechanisms which include faith actors to alleviate some of the pressure on the existing mechanisms, which no doubt are being stretched to the maximum. But by doing this, we need to ensure that these faith actors, local actors have the necessary resources, financial resources, and the technical resources to provide the psychosocial support and obviously the spiritual care that is very much needed. Ensuring faith sensitivity is embedded and weaved throughout social provisions that currently exist to ensure that this cultural needs, the spiritual needs of these children are being heard and incorporated for longer and meaningful impact. Working with faith actors offers non-informal education to build on the psychosocial support programs that exist. And it's through this that we can also ensure well-trained guardians take immediate responsibility of these children so that they also know how they can support these children and provide positive messages to prevent them from having access or being accessible to smugglers and traffickers to move in and out of the European context. There was so much more that I wanted to share, but in the interest of time, these are just some of the top level key points that I wanted to share with you all. We do have a resource that the team will be sharing with you, which has been developed by a number of organizations which provide faith-sensitive approaches to psychosocial guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nila Mufida. The next speaker is Ms. Effie Callum, is educator in the Shelter for Unaccompanied Minors of Sydney Parkes. and she will speak about the main challenges with the education of refugee children, specifically for unaccompanied, in regards with both formal and informal education in Greece. Ms. Kalu.
Hello, everyone. I'm very happy that I'm here with all of you. We prepared the presentation with my colleague, but I will present this to you. Our presentation aims to present the role of education or educators who work with refugee children in a shelter of unaccompanied minors. The main purpose when working with UAMs is to help them to integrate into society, and from our aspect as teachers, this can be achieved by their inclusion to the public school. Next slide, please. First of all, we have to distinguish the terms of integration and inclusion. First of all, integration is the process in which children are absorbed into the mainstream educational system. It helps them to become a part of a group, but would not assist them in retaining their cultural identity. Inclusion, on the other hand, is the process of educating the children in a way that benefits all the children, as it entails their clear participation in the school environment without losing their cultural characteristics. Needless to say that the main challenge is the achievement of inclusion. Next slide, please. Initially, we have to mention that the education of unaccompanied minors includes the non-formal education in the shelter and the formal education. As teachers within UAM accommodation shelters, we are responsible for non-formal education in order to prepare the minors for their inclusion within the formal education. But what are the main challenges with education of refugee children? First of all, the first obstacle we came across is the indifference of refugees to learn the Greek language. We as a teacher must not forget that for many of the refugees, learning Greek is not a priority because of the uncertainty of their stay in Greece. Also, many of these children are psychologically traumatized and have no desire whatsoever to participate in any activities inside the shelter. Also, the activities and lessons are held within the same building where the children sleep and eat. Their home is also their school. They have no contact with other children besides the one they're living with, which is very problematic because they speak all the same language and they can't connect with other children or people. Also, as all we know, Greece serves as a passage from east to west for them. The children come and go, so there's no consistency within classes and lessons. Last but not least, a large percentage are illiterate without any form of past education, so we have to start from the very beginning. Next slide, please. So now what we do in order to overcome all these obstacles and difficulties. First of all, we prepare the children for inclusion in formal education with teaching and various activities in the shelter in collaboration with our psychologists and social workers as a team. Also, we're trying to involve the kids in the educational process through creative activities, which can lead to a fun learning procedure. You will see in the end of the presentation a video where you can see all the activities we do in the shelters. And after their enrollment in the Greek public school, we keep a frequent contact and cooperation with the personnel of the school. Next slide, please. Now, about the public schools in Greece. When a minor enters at the Greek educational system, has two options. The first is the multicultural schools and the typical public schools with reception classes for refugees. In general, the bureaucracy and several time-consuming procedures have a significant impact on the registration within the Greek educational system. Furthermore, many children are excluded from the educational system due to the lack of space in public schools, especially here in Athens, which is the biggest city and the capital of the country, and we have many refugees and migrants, and also the unwillingness of the schools to accept refugees. Next slide, please. As well as the two above mentioned options about multicultural schools and general public schools, both of them have their advantages and disadvantages. Within the multicultural schools, the personnel specialized in multicultural education, special tools and handbook are used, the teaching material and the curriculum is differentiated, inclusive environment and multicultural projects are implemented. On the other hand, the number of multicultural schools is inadequate and they're not preferred by domestic students. A fact is not significantly the inclusion of the refugee. Regarding the typical public schools are helpful towards a faster inclusion. The reception classes aim at a faster learning of Greek language. However, the reception classes are not a common practice since the vast majority of typical public schools do not have one. Furthermore, the operation does not commence from the beginning of the educational year, which has an impact at the educational process, and the recruited personnel is not specialized and familiar with the target group. Next slide, please. Now we would like to present a real case study, which we faced, how to say, an issue with the students. So I read, and after we discuss about this. A 7-year-old unaccompanied minor attends the first grade of a Greek multicultural school. After 2 months of attendance, the teacher of the class calls the educator and the psychologist of the shelter to discuss the difficulties that the kid faces during the lesson, which are hyperactivity, lack of concentration, difficulty in understanding simple commands, and learning difficulties. After discussion with educators of the school and also of the shelter, the social worker and the psychologist were addressed to a center of mental health. The child underwent a clinical assessment with a psychometric tool, WISC, but the test couldn't be completed because the oral part is adapted for the Greek population. Hence, it couldn't be differentiated and translated. Next slide, please. So the result is that we couldn't finish this test. There weren't any valid diagnoses because there are no standardized tests for refugees and migrants here in Greece. So there couldn't be a proper intervention from school, and all of this led to exclusion and slow progress for the children with learning disabilities and other difficulties. However, our scientific team, in collaboration with the scientists and other specialists, is trying to enhance the abilities of the children in an optimum way. Now we will watch the video about the activities in the shelters. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Kalu. I won't make any comments because time passed by. So I introduce the last speaker, Mr. Karel Youngheim, migration specialist in Kerk-in-Acti in the Netherlands. And he will speak about informal education and activities for migrant and refugee children in the Netherlands. So Mr. Karem.
Well, thank you all for inviting me to join your webinar on the education of children and refugee children in Europe. I work for Kerk-in-Acti, which is the diaconal program of the Protestant Church in the Netherlands. So like Cindy Parksis, we are also a church program. I will first tell about the steps which refugee children undertake while in the asylum procedure, and then come back to the situation of once they are accepted in the Netherlands and have a status. So, first. At the moment in the Netherlands, refugee children have to wait a long time before getting into the procedure. So once they arrive in the Netherlands, they are in a pre-reception center, and it is a long time waiting and very boring and a nervous time for them. So once they are in an asylum seeker center, however, they have several activities, informal and informal education. So they should then be accepted by the Ministry of Education for a regular schooling, which is in the Netherlands compulsory from 4 years of age onwards. And in these classes, they pay special attention, of course, to learning the Dutch language. So it is a special education for learning the language for children from another not Dutch origin speaking. In the asylum seeker centers, there are various organizations, NGOs who are active, like the Dutch Refugee Council, who has a program which is called Child Right Club, where children discuss about their rights. For example, there is the right of access to information. And for information, these days you need a functioning Wi-Fi. So also there is attention to sports, which is done by an organization called War Child, and a foundation called Happiness, Vrolijkheid in Dutch. They do cultural activities. However, there are several activities for them, but not so much during the weekends or in holidays. So for the children, there is still a gap to be filled. And also some churches, local churches, have groups who sometimes organize activities for these refugee children. When unaccompanied minors come to the Netherlands, they are put in the hands of an official organization which is called NIDOS, which is the Dutch Guidance Organization for Unaccompanied Refugee Children. And they may be placed in small-scale refugee asylum seeker centers, or also with host families. There's much more to be said, but I have to be brief to stay within the time framework of the 6 minutes. Well, so during the procedure of the children, formal education is not always available. So there is a lobbying advocacy that it should be made available to all in all stages. what I see as a problem is that the asylum seeker centers are like a kind of small islands where only refugees live. So there is a kind of a problem of that people, young children and also the adults get used into integration into the wider society. So they stay very much with other refugees during most of the day, though the schools are sometimes outside the camp. And people talk about them as camps. So the asylum seeker centers are referred to by them as camps. So that's how they feel. So after getting a status from the IND, which is the Ministry of Migration, people move to housing, welfare housing into a local municipality. So from the asylum seeker centers, they are distributed all over the country, which means that also children, as well as their parents, they have to start and build up social relations again. So they are without, well, when you have friends, when you play at school, these ties are broken and you move into a place maybe a few hundred kilometers far away. Then there is for the children also, again, the compulsory education, which is for 5 to 16 years, and you have to finish it with a grade in, for example, which give access to university or a diploma like everybody. So once you are accepted as a refugee status holder, also the children, they enjoy the same rights and obligations as others. And then the municipalities are responsible for integration, and they are advised by a knowledge center called FAROS, called National Knowledge Center for Mental Health. And they make policy recommendations to the municipalities, that the municipalities, they should do good case management, so to follow the adult refugees and their children, and apply a multi-stakeholder approach. So also work together with NGOs on the local level, work together with churches and work together with mosques when they have social activities. So it is official policy that there should be connections with also churches and mosques. As they know, that the local organizations, the CSO, civil society organizations, enjoy a great deal of trust among the refugees themselves. And important to mention is that the refugees have organized churches themselves, where the children are brought together for social activities and worship. So in the informal education, the parents and the children, once they are settled in the municipality, in the social housing, they get introduction program by local branches of the Dutch Refugee Council, Vluchtelingenwerk, or another NGO which is interested. Vluchtelingenwerk, the Dutch Refugee Council, also organizes summer camps for refugee children. So for those in the asylum seeker centers, and as well as poor families who cannot afford a week break for their children. And also, once the refugees are settled in the municipalities, also the churches and mosques, they have programs of welcoming, or they do activities like sharing your table, so joint meals. This cannot be done in Corona times, of course, but before the Corona times, there were dozens of local churches organizing social activities for refugees. So once after the, now we are in the COVID pandemic, for refugee children, there are special problems. So once their parents cannot afford buying proper laptops, it is difficult for them once you are in a lockdown to be in education. So for months, schools were closed, and it is a disruption to the schooling program of especially the refugee children. Now the schools are open again in our country, but it was a severe social impact. And because of the unfavorable socio-economic position of the parents, refugee children with less income are more vulnerable for also domestic violence. So the children, they are in a kind of limbo from the origin when they came from. Culturally, they are between two worlds, and the worlds of the parents and the home country, country of origin, and a new country in the Netherlands. But children learn very quickly, and amazingly, they speak good Dutch when you compare with parents. So I myself, I tried to learn some Tigrinya from Eritrea, and it is for 50 plus. It is amazingly difficult, but the youngsters, they learn very quickly, and for teenagers, also unaccompanied minors, when they get status, they go to a schooling program. They can enter at for learning a profession, like in metalworking or healthcare, and also they make friends inside the education, and they get some attention for programs of vluchtelingenwerk, like personal finance management. So once you are 18 years old and you are on your own, and have a small apartment, managing your finance in the Netherlands is kind of different than where you came from. But for refugee children, it's difficult because sometimes also they are discriminated again on the labor market. Then there are special cases like unaccompanied minors who do not get a status and are outside the procedure. Once they are 18 years old, they have no access to asylum seeker center anymore, and then they are supposed to leave the country when they do not want or they cannot. Outside the official organizations, so they are vulnerable then. And there is the case of children who are whose parents have not come to the Netherlands to seek asylum, but they came, for example, on a holiday visa from Philippines or Brazil. But their parents like to work in the Netherlands for domestic worker or in a restaurant. And then, well, they have no residence status permit, not permit holders. So for the children, it's only they have the right to the basic education. But, well, it's very difficult for them to say to friends that parents are illegal, so to say, illegal in the country. So not having excuse me, let me join. So now the power will hold. So for the children of parents without a status, it is very difficult to make their way in the country. What we do as a church is that the local committees care for, especially for refugees with a status. And in the larger cities, there are diaconal organizations who also care for people without a residence permit, so-called undocumented people. And there are buddy projects. Some churches offer space, like beds. Yeah, but this is also a challenge for the local churches at the moment. From how can we link with refugees and their children when you cannot meet in person due to Corona lockdown restrictions? So the role of the churches is not like that we organize all kinds of social services. This is done by the government. But also what refugees themselves say to us is the most important what you can give as a church to us as refugees is the feeling of welcome and friendship, and this is what's often the case. So the
Mr.
most
Correll, sorry for the intervention, but
Yeah.
I need to ask you to complete.
Yes, yes. My last sentence that yeah, the most important thing we could give as a church in the Netherlands is the human capital, like accompaniment, social activities, and friendship. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we have to go on with some questions from the participants to the panelists. And without any further delay, I will start with the question for Ms. Athanasia Kotsiatou. The question so goes like, what I have seen in the UK in the first stage is a skepticism with regard to the age of the child. I know of cases where a 12-year-old, 13-year-old is judged as being age 21. This means they are placed alone amongst adults as an adult, no care as a child, no education, and subject to deportation back into a country where they are at threat. How can we encourage host nations to treat these minors not as a threat to be treated with suspicion, but as a child in need of care?
We face the same problem also in Greece. It's sometimes we have the same problems. It's a very difficult question to answer. It's very difficult. I think that we have to, the psychosocial supporters have to provide them services for trauma and for basic needs at the beginning, and for other psychosocial support. It's not easy to support these children. And I think that all the state, NGOs, and all the people has communities also, local communities has to do something all together in order to support them. It's not easy. And we face, I think that all the member states of Europe face this kind of problem. I don't know if I answer to this question.
Okay,
Something
thank
else?
you. The next question is for Ms. Nilam. The participant says that you spoke about faith sensitivity to psychosocial support. How can this be achieved by government support programs, and how faith-based organizations become more embracing and respectful of refugees' religious beliefs?
That's a really good question. And I think that there has been substantive work done in this area to recognize the important role faith actors are currently playing. So there was an extensive piece of work done by the Joint Learning Initiative around ending violence against children supported by faith actors. And what that illustrated was the critical role that faith actors and faith communities play in preventing violence amongst children. And this doesn't only speak to harmful practices, but it speaks to a whole host of different risks that children are exposed to. And when you think about children coming in to a community, often unaccompanied, then they try and find an anchor to something that they're familiar with. And often that familiarity comes in the religious establishments that they recognize, and that's a universal place, regardless of the context in which they find themselves in. So this is why it's so important that there has to be more lobbying of governments to recognize the role that faith organizations, religious establishments can play, because I feel that there is some fear and there is quite a lot of propaganda in Europe against the role that religious actors and religious establishments can play. In addition to that, I think to have a more holistic approach is to involve faith communities and faith actors from inception, rather than as a response to a crisis or a response to the kind of like governmental structures not being able to support. So when these children are coming in, rather than them falling through the gaps and not being able to get the support that they need, that right from the beginning, there is this kind of inter-agency response which caters to the various needs of the children. And I think this would also speak to the question that was posed previously, that when there is this kind of subjective idea around the ages of children, whether they are children, whether they're adults, if there is this kind of inter-agency response and the subjectivity is taken away, and there is kind of like an assessment, a rigorous assessment done, that may speak to some of these kind of measures that might be in there, which may also involve incorporating faith actors as well. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. The next question goes for Ms. Kalu and Mr. Youngheim. How can education help developing resilience in refugee and migrant children? And what role do host communities have?
I didn't hear the last part of the question. Can you repeat, please?
How can education help developing resilience in refugee and migrant children? And what role do host communities have?
I think first, Mrs. Kalu, would you like to react?
I think school is very important. It's very important for all the refugees and migrants in order to make them feel included in the society. First of all, they learn the language so they can communicate and have an easier life. But also for the children, I speak for the children, they continue to have a normal life. So it's very important not to exclude them from the school, because they have already lost many months or years of school traveling from their country to Greece. So it's very important from the community and the schools to accept refugees immediately. I don't know in other countries, but here in Greece, we wait about 6 months sometimes for the registration to schools. And this is a very valuable time for children to continue his childhood. I don't know, Karel, if you want to continue.
Yeah, thank you. Well, for an organization like De Vrolijkheid, who works, the Happiness Foundation in our country, who works with refugee children, they have the resilience encouraging approach, which says do not stress the refugee status or history of children, but stress the positive experts and the talents which every child has. So if the child is good in making music, invite it to make music. If it is good in drawing or storytelling, well, encourage the children to develop their talents. So that it also, when they are in a mixed group in a school with non-refugee background children, it is important that they are being treated equally, like every child. It is just that being a refugee is just a kind of transitional period. Once you are settled in a new country, they should be treated with respect. And the same applies for the host communities. Do not set them apart or treat them as different, but make social activities, joining with non-refugee background children, and inviting them, for example, to play football. I know an Eritrean priest in my neighborhood whose son is very good in football. So he is with all the children in a football team. And that is building on his resilience because he likes playing football. So stress what they like and put them on the same basis as other children. Thank you.
Thank you. Another one question for Nilam. As a Muslim-based organizations, what challenges have you faced in providing psychosocial support for refugees in Europe?
That's another really good question. So I think the biggest, two of the biggest challenges is one, ensuring that faith actors have the necessary training to be psychosocial first aiders and provide the necessary support beyond just the spiritual care, which they can naturally do through scriptures, through healing. But there is the technical side of providing counseling and alternative therapies, which these children often need in those situations. So that's one thing. And then the second aspect is the lack of funding to be able to have the capacity development and access to resources. So there's a lot of availability in the humanitarian context in various spaces, but these faith actors may not always necessarily have the know-how of how to get that information and then apply it. So I think that if more funding could be available, which specializes in training these faith actors on these technical areas, that will perhaps facilitate more support being provided to these children in a much more holistic manner. And I think just speaking to the educational element, the first word revealed to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was read. So education is a fundamental aspect within the Islamic context. And when you think of children moving from these fragile context and conflict context, education is that kind of like centralized pillar, which provides them some aspect of normality, and often they don't get that in their own context. So they may have to go to madrasa, they may have to go to an informal setting. So I think by having this collaborative approach where we work with faith actors of multiple faiths, we could see that in these educational establishments, whether they're formal or informal, that teachers could perhaps provide that first aid. And in the UK, there are counsellors that are provided in the school context. And in the informal context, so if there's a madrasa or a religious establishment, that service is also provided. And it will enable that child to build that trust because they've already had that familiarity, because they know that establishment based on their own experiences in their own countries. So I think getting the right training for these faith actors, providing them the funds so that they have a safe space to provide the support for the children, and positive messages. I think we don't utilize these platforms as much as we can.
Thank you. The next question is addressed mainly for Athanasia Kotsiatou and Karel. What is the role of faith institutions such as churches in Greece and the Netherlands in advocating the government in acceleration of process for refugee children to enter public schools? Athanasia, would you like to start?
Yes, as you know very well, our organization is part of Church of Greece. And we have to say that the Greek Church believes that every minors, refugee minors, is welcome to Greece, open its arms, and gives all the things that it can. There are many differences between Muslims, Christians, but for us, it's very important that all the children, refugees, migrants, and Greeks, and from other countries are children. There is no difference between this population, differences between this population. We try to advocate minors and refugees, because we work with refugees for many years, for many issues. We try to have to run some programs for minors and also for refugees and for international applicants. And we try to support as much as we can this population. It's not easy. We have also many problems, funding problems, and other things, bureaucratic also problems, but we try to support as much as we can from our aspect and from the Church of Greece. Karel?
Yeah, from the Netherlands, the situation is a bit different. We do not have to advocate for inclusion of refugee children in schools, because the national and local governments take this responsibility very, very seriously. And education is compulsory for every child. So they are also included. So once, but during the situation of when they are in the asylum seeker centers, there is a coalition of which Kerkenactie has been part, but now we maintain close links with them. There is an NGO coalition called Kind in AZC, Child in Asylum Seeker Center, which monitors the availability of education for children in asylum seeker centers. And they do the advocacy at the moment by maintaining close contact with the Ministry of Migration, which is ultimately responsible for the management of the asylum seeker centers and the availability of social services. So we do not do it ourselves, but there are NGOs who do. Thank you.
Thank you. I will pose one more question. After that, I would like some help with time because I'm mixed up a little. So for Nilam, is there anything moving towards the cooperation of faith actors in kind of interreligious context?
Yes, so recognizing that faith actors from all faith backgrounds play such a crucial role, Islamic Relief and World Vision embarked on developing a methodology that they had already existed around channels of hope and child protection. And what this methodology ultimately does is develop the capacity of faith actors and community actors on how to better protect children in their own context, given the type of risks that they might be exposed to based on culture, based on scripture, and create a much more safer environment. And we did a couple of pilot rollouts of both the Muslim and Christian integrated approach, and we also did separate delivery of this methodology, and it proved really, really fruitful. One, because it allowed Christian and Muslim faith leaders to come together and realize that a lot of the challenges and a lot of the commonalities that existed between the two faiths, and ultimately the approaches that the faiths were taking to address child protection concerns were very, very similar. So it really created a very loving and nurturing environment for both the faith actors to learn from each other, the good practices and the challenges. We then rolled the same methodology out in Bosnia. And again, some of the complexities there were slightly different, but the ultimate learning that was coming out from there was that the faith leaders were experiencing the same sort of challenges of how to embed these learnings and practices within their communities, build the trust of the communities, and have a better understanding of what are the risks around child protection that children are facing, and how to mitigate them and promote positive behavior and encourage that environment of learning. I'm happy to speak to anyone offline. You can get my details from the organizers. It is very much something that's very close to my heart, but I'm very mindful of the time here. And we've been embarking on this kind of interreligious approach for some time now. So I'll be happy to speak to anyone that's interested.
Thank you. So as we have gone out of time, I will ask Suchit to come forward and tell us the details and inform us about the breakout rooms. Suchit?
Yes, I also see a participant raising hand to share something. Maybe we can invite the participant as well before we go to the groups.
Yeah, if there is enough time.
I think that Mrs. Aroni has raised up her head. I don't know if it's available now.
Would you like to speak, Kelly?
I don't want to take time, so I'm okay if you want to proceed with the groups, and I can keep it for plenary or for the third webinar. It's up to you. I really do not mind.
If you want to, maybe you can make a short comment and then we can go to the groups while I set up the group settings.
Oh, okay. I wanted to make a comment about Siniparxis because I know very well of their work, and I would like to know. I would like to say that having the overall idea of the 67 shelters of unaccompanied minors in Greece, because this is my mandate, working for Secretariat Special of Unaccompanied Minors in the Ministry of Migration. I want to say that they are among the best and the more efficient and competent actors that we have. I'm not saying it as a compliment. I'm saying it because there are certain factors that need to be mentioned. What they're doing is that they have spirituality and faith as a backbone of their organization, which is not the case for the rest of the NGOs and the agents that run shelters. So the faith component is very important when it comes to child protection and psychosocial support. So this is one, that it's not taken for granted that the organization and the agents have it. And the second one is the qualification and the training of the human factor, because many times we talk about teachers, psychologists, but it is within the human factor and how well qualified they are. I also speak because of experience, because Effie Kalu, as well as Effie Skrapali, who presented their work with education, take part and are very, very active participants in a 6-month seminar that we organized, that it is not obligatory, it is not mandatory, and they're always there, and their input is very, very valuable. So I think that what CNIPARX is presented, it's a showcase, and it's a very good practice that should become policy, because it's not always the case. Believe me, I know everybody in the field. And something else that I wanted to say to dear Nilam, I love the fact that actors work with methodology, because usually we go out there and we say, okay, now we will work on child protection, or okay, we will work with education. Nothing works without the proper methodological tools. And we talk about what education can do, but there's so many things that education can destroy if it is not quality education, if it is not adaptable, accessible. So we need to discuss about the details, I think, and CNIPARX have these details. So chapeau, like the friends say. Thank you, Suchi.
Okay, on behalf of CNIPARX, I would like to say that we haven't paid Mrs. Aroni to say all this. Okay. Thank you anyway.
No, you haven't, but you have Effie with me. So, and I know Pater Papasifakis, and I have come to the premises of Kabani. So I have a very objective and individual opinion.
Okay, and this raises also the subject, which it's something that we can discuss, Suchit, in the break rooms, of the skills and the training people working with migrant, refugee, and children should have, because not all social workers, all psychologists, all professionals can do that without any proper training or without having some education. That's for me. And now, Suchit, please.
Yes, we are now inviting you to go into smaller groups so that you can have a more in-depth conversation about what the presenter shared, but also around a question that we are going to share. Maybe Despina, if you can elaborate the question for me, I can project it, but if you can elaborate the question, then I can invite participants.
Okay. No, I think the questions that we're going to discuss are the most challenging aspects of psychosocial support, and we could include their skills and education of people working for the psychosocial support for refugee and migrant children. And a very important part of psychosocial support is how can the local community be sensitized in this part, because the psychosocial support does not only address the needs of the children, but also creates the bridges with the local community, which must also be sensitized and ready to accept these children. So we can discuss these two aspects. Say our, my son is coming down in the background. Say a few things about the challenges and give some concrete recommendations and go from there. Okay.
Thank you, Despina. So what we are going to do is divide into 4 different groups, and in each group you'll find facilitators who will share. And there is also, we are trying to record all the sharing that happens in each of the groups, and we are using for that a tool called Google Jamboard. Retta has, I think, shared the link on the chat. So if you want to directly input your notes into the chat, into the Jamboard, you are welcome to. Otherwise, if you verbally share during the group discussions, one of the facilitators will take those as and include into the Jamboard. In order to join the groups, soon you'll find a pop-up that invites you to join one of the groups. So please do click on join breakout room to join that group. And we will invite you back at the end to come back to plenary once the group discussions have finished. So let me open up the breakout room. If you have any difficulties in joining the breakout room, please do open your mic and share, and I'll try my best to help you.
Thank you so much.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had meaningful discussions in the small groups. Athanasia, can I hand over to you to take over and
Yes.
the presentations?
Yes, thank you. So I hope we're all back. Welcome back. We have to present each group what they result in. So each group has 4 minutes. Would like the first speaker of the first group to start.
Hello, it's me, Despina, speaking on behalf of the first group. I'm afraid we were involved in a very lively conversation, and it took some other turns apart from what we had as questions. We talked a bit about the challenges of psychosocial support. The first thing we've said is that these children are usually traumatized, not only through their journey, but also by arriving here. So it's a very very subtle issue how to work with traumatized children. And also we mainly focused on state policies and the European policies, which not which are not always in contradiction to what European spirit is, the spirit of sharing, solidarity, of accepting diversity, of multiculturalism. Hasn't shown that face during the last few years. And that has, as a result, quite not very friendly policies from the state and from the local communities towards the integration of minors, of refugees and migrants. And we talked that's a main part of psychosocial support, is to teach these children and give them the skills to be strong, to be able to face these adversities, and to be able to find their way in a not so welcoming or helpful or easy environment. As regards the part of the local community, it also has to do with the European policies, with the state policies, because sometimes the policies of the state create a special a special picture to the local communities. It means that if the state policies are not welcoming enough or not easy enough, the local communities are not going to be very welcoming to strangers. So there need to be some local community interventions. Karel was nice enough to share us some things that the church volunteers do in the Netherlands, where Dutch grannies read books with children, and that's way helping them to be familiar with the language and feel part of the society. And that's all we could say. I hope it made some sense. Okay.
Okay, thank you. The presenter of the second group, please.
Who is the presenter?
The second group, please. The presenter.
Hello, I was the moderator of the second group. I think that Mr. Theophile Trude will be the presenter of our group.
Okay, so first we talked about all of the importance for them to be integrated, and that the person that take care of them are really committed, like on a long-term scale, so so that they can create a connection with that person, and not only with like changing every 1 or 2 months. There is a way to, for example, in schools, they shouldn't be in a separate or different schools. They should be integrated in the same school as every other kids. And in order for them to develop themselves, they need consistency. So as I said before, long term, and mainly the language barrier, and the way that people cannot understand the trauma of children that is coming from another place, and we need the people that are really specialized and in the field, in this field. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. From the third group, the presenter of the third group.
Yeah, hello, that's me. Yeah, so we looked first at some of the challenges, such as assessing the age of unaccompanied minors being difficult. Often they're put in with adults and not accepted as children. So how might, and officials are not always qualified in order to assess the age of children. Children are sometimes placed in police custody for a long time, not in prison, but they're still in custody, and that limits their movement and any kind of access to what's going on in society. There's a lack of money and financial support, and this makes children vulnerable to exploitation, especially when children are homeless. And there's a tendency to sometimes criminalize children who are exploited rather than the people who are exploiting them. And to supporting these children in COVID times is very difficult, as there's limited access to them for their safety and for others as well. Teachers can face challenges with regard to supporting children in school, particularly if those children are traumatized and they don't have the skills to work with traumatized children. So supporting those teachers is key. Some of the good practices and how can we overcome difficulties are to provide a social space for children to interact. And during COVID times, that can mean online. I described a program that happens in Glasgow where local museums or community centers will come regularly online and kind of talk about what it is that they're offering. For example, the museums brought out an object that might come from a part of the world where some of the refugees were coming from, and it showed that this is an artifact that was being honored and respected, and that it was being held in a museum, and that those museums are welcome spaces. So that kind of exchange of saying, we acknowledge where you're coming from is an important space. The importance of keeping children informed on what's going on, not only locally and where it is that they're living now, but where they've come from, so that they're not so worried about, well, what's happening? Let's keep them informed about what's going on, and enabling them to engage online in those discussions and the provision of information. So how to make the local communities more aware. What is the best practice? There was talk about celebrations that have happened in neighborhoods, but of course these haven't been possible with regard to COVID. Sometimes it's about inviting people into your families and celebrations, into activities. Again, very difficult right now, very difficult to do. And constantly looking for new solutions. How can we find ways of keeping people included? It's important to engage with the local mosques, as they can be of great help and have a great effect on the children and refugees, and encouraging civil society and religious organizations to work together and to provide their inputs as part of a community. And nothing beats sitting down and having a conversation with somebody, just getting to know them. So I think that's everything. Anyone else have anything they want to add, please do. But yeah, that's us. Thank you. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So we go on with the fourth group. The fourth group presenter.
Dimitris will represent our group. Dimitris. Dimitris, you're muted.
Do you hear me now? Yes.
Yes, now.
As for the first question, we all agreed that we had a positive reflection from the panel. We realized common problems found in other countries, and we also discussed some difficulties and some questioning about how funds are utilized and to support education for refugee children. And we agreed that some of these issues should be further discussed. As for the second question, I need to find out about system support, change of ideas. So it's a bit confused now here. Children to context of facilities. Okay. We also come up into conclusion that is also interesting to find how much churches are involved in supporting children, if this is a positive thing, and how system supports refugees children if the system is well prepared to help them. And we also finally said that it's a necessity for further cultural exchange. Okay, it's difficult during the lockdown, but also maybe refugee children should also attend class to learn about about the religion from the host country. We don't have other recommendations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the last group, the presenter, please.
We had only 4 groups.
Oh.
Athanasia, because
okay.
we only took 4 groups in. Thank you.
Okay. So we have some time for plenary discussion. Am I correct, Chief?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
We have, I think, around 15 minutes at least. So I think we can openly discuss about the presentations and anything that people wish to share, building on what we have discussed so far.
Great.
If I may, because I see lots of reluctance, probably most of you are quite tired. I would like, first of all, to thank everybody for participating. And just to mention that the psychosocial support is a very multifaceted procedure, very difficult to discuss in all its aspects within such a short session. It has, it needs people who are very committed. It needs, as regards migrant and refugee children, it needs a better education and well-trained people to do it. And I would be interested in learning more on the part of, on behalf of my organization about things that, ways of educating our collaborators mostly. My main question and my main the thing that I have thought for a lot all this time, that people who work with social workers and people working with the children as professionals should be better trained and have some input. And it would be interesting if other people from other countries shared what their practices and methodologies are on that part.
I'm from the UK and I'm not all that familiar with it, but there's something called the Community Sponsorship Program. And it works only, sadly, only with refugees from Syria. And so these will be people that will have been assessed already by the UNHCR. But this program was something that the UK government supported, and those communities that have had accepted refugees, they worked together, whether it's through a religious organization or community organizations, but it would be about finding some kind of accommodation, a home of some description, and so it's a kind of 360 support. So it's not just about finding the home, it's also about helping people to find, families to find schools, to find healthcare facilities, to learn English if they don't already have it, to help them with regard to finding employment. It's ensuring that there's a community support around them. So I think, although I think I'm sad that it's been limited to Syrian refugees only and not open to people in general. I think that the way that the program worked was actually a very good program. So yeah, just something to know about.
Would anyone else wants to share something?
Yes, if I may add from the Netherlands a bit of experience. The municipalities are entrusted the ultimate responsibility for integrating the newcomers, adults as well as children. So overall view is by municipalities, and they have to organize these kind of multi-stakeholder meetings. So in fact, when, for example, a child is not doing well at school, it is for the teacher to signal this and to identify that there could be a problem, but then it's not for the teacher to solve the problem, but maybe contact the local doctor or the psychical healthcare organization. So there is a healthcare for psychological issues and also for youth. It's called jeugdgezondheidszorg, so youth psychological healthcare specialists. and that's also what you so know your limits and refer to the right persons. That is what our system would do, and that is also what I tell local churches when you meet refugees or refugee children where there could be traumatized and psychological problem. Do not try to solve themselves, but seek help from qualified organizations, persons.
Rasika, I see you've raised your hand. Please go ahead.
Okay, hello everybody. I would like to apologize for not joining, on time. I was struggling with the connectivity. So I wanted to add to the participants that teachers who are in charge of those, those category of people, those refugees and immigrants, should be trained on some types of activities that will help those students, the refugee students, to integrate and not to be left behind. Those activities should enhance, what we say, the collaboration, the cooperation, engage them into group work rather than competitive work or competitive activities. Teachers may enhance or may promote those non-violent communication skills so as to help those refugees take part in all the debate and in those. So doing so, they will feel, psychologically supported. Because once they are at school and they feel neglected or they feel somehow, not welcomed by the hosting, let's say countries, I guess they cannot cooperate, they cannot give the best of themselves. But on the other part, on the other hand, if they are given the opportunity to share in every single activity, I guess they will do miracles. This is what I want to say, and thank you very much.
Thank you. So thank you everyone for participating, and thank you also the presenters for today's webinars. I really hope that, yes.
Thanasi, could I also share a reflection? And this is a question that I wanted to open up a bit also. I see when we think of psychosocial interventions, we always think of the refugee community as being the recipients of the intervention, the main recipient. For me, I'm also thinking it in another way. We have a populist wave around the world, and we see that populist wave also in Europe. Can we recognize the host community's grievances, the fears of the host community, and think of psychosocial interventions that addresses those grievances and the fears of a host community? I think we are really addressing, we are doing as much as we can to address the needs of psychological needs of the refugees and migrant communities, but are we really empathizing with the host community enough? And is there a psychosocial point of view that can help the host community a bit more? This is a general reflection I'm having listening to everybody's sharing. And maybe if anybody also wants to add to that, and maybe there are things that I am not aware of that you can also share.
I strongly believe also that you have right, but I think that sometimes also the communities of migrants and refugees are very close because they are afraid the European reality also. So we have all together to make small steps toward and see what we have in common, first of all. And to see that we want to live together in this place, in Europe. So all of us, we have to make small steps, the host countries and the communities of migrants and refugees, because also they are very close to their places and they don't they are open their flights and they don't speak to us. They sometimes because they are afraid of us a lot. And also in Athens, I can speak for Athens, you can see that most of the people from the most migrants live in the center of Athens. So it's a place that you cannot see many migrants in the north of Athens or in the south of Athens. So it's kind of place, a place that they live and they don't want to go out of these places. Okay,
it becomes it's kind of ghettos, you mean?
Ghettos, yes,
in a way. Okay, we have 3 hands raised. I don't know, do we have time, Suchit? Very quickly.
Yes. We have a few more minutes still, yes.
Okay, so who's going to speak? Razika, Geli, and Daniela.
I believe
Take
Aroni
turns.
has been first, Miss Aroni.
Okay, Miss Aroni and Razika.
Thank you. What I wanted to say is 2 things in Suchit's reflection. I totally agree that at least Greeks, I cannot speak for the rest of the countries, need psychosocial support, because we know that after the financial crisis in Greece, 1 out of 2 people had depression and they were taking medication for it. So before we even got out of one crisis, we had the refugee crisis on the top of it. So I totally agree for the psychosocial support. The problem is that whatever starts with psycho in Greece bears a stigma. So if you tell somebody that you need psychological support, both words is meaning that he is a victim, he needs support, he is weak, so it creates resistance. And people who are working within the field know what I mean. So yes, I do agree, but it's a very touchy issue to tackle and cope with. Thank you.
So on the end, if I can add, actually, I think I've been inspired by all the last speakers, and in particular with the social view. Definitely the subject of psychosocial support is very complex, multifaceted. You have at least 2 sides, the migrants and the host community, and it's true. It seems that like European Union does not have, let's say, completely clear or agreed policy how to approach or how to work further to, let's say, resolve or resolve the problems, let's say, of migrants. And that can be seen because there is no, let's say, unique strategy. There is no here and there. I mean, the countries are making the strategies, then out of that you have to make the laws and then procedures. And I agree, I think I saw in some of the panel discussions that we are talking about psychosocial support as something that has to be in accordance with certain procedure, in accordance with the law. There is a legal aspect of that is affecting migrants, and it has to be stable and long-term. So it seems actually that definitely this is excellent idea that this type of support has to work both ways. And I think Athanasia as well was right. It seems we do not know enough about each other. So, I mean, as many information as we can get from one side of the migrants, on the other side, share this information and make aware host communities about everything. I believe that maybe that would be the way forward. And definitely this dialogue today and webinar is one of these, let's say, actions that maybe can contribute to that. So that is on my part. Thank you.
Razika, did you want to share something as well?
Yeah. I want just to reflect on your reflection, if you do not mind. Talking about the psycho support here, talking about those hosting countries and their fear, it's quite understandable. We can understand it. The situation is extremely challenging. Circumstances are beyond those hosting countries' control. So I think this integration doesn't come overnight. So what is needed from those refugees is that they should be patient enough. They should be, they seek the integration in a very peaceful way, so as not to create, I mean, some troubles, because for the hosting countries, it's so demanding to find or to respond to all their needs, because they are struggling with their native citizens. And what about those refugees? So it's quite complicated. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Athanasia, I think we can hand over to you.
Thank you. So I would like to thank you all. It was very interesting, everything that was said. I really hope, actually we hope, that all the comments and the recommendations will be used for future use. And let's hope that things will be, I don't know how to say, but we support the psychosocial support and also the educational system for the refugee children. So I will have to give the floor to, let me remember.
Daniela, I think Daniela is going to say
Yes,
goodbye.
yes. Definitely, I got the pleasure and the honor to thank all the participants of this webinar on behalf of CinePraxis organization where I work, and on behalf of our partners Arigato International. So firstly, I would like to thank our wonderful moderator that has a first-hand knowledge on issues that are affecting unaccompanied migrants and children, refugee children in Greece, as she's the director of our shelters for unaccompanied minors. We would like to thank as well our panelists that gave excellent presentations that inspired us to have a fruitful dialogue on subject of psychosocial support. Definitely the subject is complex, and we have to thank Dialogue for Network and CACID that made actually this cooperation and webinar real. As you know, that is the European wide platform of civil society organization and faith-based organization that are looking forward to find better recommendations to improve the, let's say, the policy of inclusion of migrants. And they are doing it through the dialogue. So thank you. Thanks to all the participants, each and every one of you, for your ideas and experiences that you have shared with us. On the end, I will ask you if you want to join us with your questions on our forum on the website of Solidarity, our project. As well, I would like to say that we will go to post the presentation and share our resources. And I want to announce the third and final webinar, which is going to happen on the 19th of May. So you are all welcome, and we are hoping that you're going to join us on that day too. So thank you all. And I would like as well to thank a lot to our colleagues from Arigato that have this super experience, wonderful experience in, let's say, making as well and supporting this webinar on the technical stuff, except the, let's say, the essence on which we work together creating this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone, and look forward to seeing you in the next webinar.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye to everyone.
Thank you, Shuji, for everything. You're wonderful as always. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a good night.
Good evening.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye to everybody.
Bonne soirée. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.
Thank you, Karel. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good evening to everybody. Bye.
Assalamu alaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
Thank you.